Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Dawn. Thanks for joining me in my garden today, and I'm literally in my garden today. I garden in Zone 8B, and today we're going to be diving into one of my favorite of all favorites, the Oak Leaf Hydrangea. So I'm going to be taking you through how to care for it, how to fertilize, the right conditions, everything you need to know to grow this beautiful plant in your yard. So with just a little bit of care, not much really, they can be maintenance free. It kind of just depends on what you want to give to them, but they can bring 4 seasons of gorgeousness to your yard. So we'll go through how showy they are and what they look like in different seasons. And if you give them a little bit of care, they'll give you a lifetime of beauty. I actually have 5 in my yard, and I think if I had space, I'd have 5 more, but I've kind of run out of space, so it's not an option.
Also, in my April garden tour, I had a lot of viewers ask about my Oak Leaf Hydrangea tree. So I'm going to show you how I trained this oak leaf bush into a tree form.
I hope that this gives you a little inspiration to get a few oak leaves in your garden. All right, so what makes the oak leaf special? Well, first of all, if you look at the leaf, there's a reason it's called an oak leaf. The leaves actually resemble the leaves on an oak tree, and that is why it's different from mophead hydrangeas, which is what we're all most familiar with. Also, if you look at the flower, you'll see the difference in the shape of the flower. This is more of a cone shape versus a mophead, which has a round flower. And actually, oak leaf thrive in warm climates like we have here in Texas. So if you live in the South, this is maybe a hydrangea that you want to try as an option in your yard. It does prefer part shade. It'll tolerate some full sun. Sun is different depending upon where you are, but definitely Texas sun, if you can give it afternoon shade, that would be best. If it is in full sun, you definitely want to make sure you're giving it more moisture, but in the shade, it's typically under trees, so it can tolerate drier conditions. Once it's established, it is drought tolerant, so that is something to keep in mind if you live in an area where water is scarce. It can get pretty tall on you. This plant can grow 4 to 8 feet tall, some as tall as 10. Most important things you need to know, because the flower is the most important part of this plant, is that it does bloom on old wood. So pruning is key to making sure that your plant produces flowers. So pruning at the wrong time can definitely affect how your plant's going to look. So timing is everything with this plant. And that goes actually for all hydrangeas, but this is the one we're talking about today. Since the oak leaf only blooms on old wood, any pruning, it needs to allow time for new growth and maturity for new flowers.
The best time is right after flowering, so maybe late summer where the blooms begin to fade. If you prune in early season, it should only be limited to dead or broken branches. Definitely no fall or winter prunings. You don't want to remove the flower buds. When you prune, you're going to be looking for a few things.
One is damaged or diseased wood. You want to take that off. You don't want the plant trying to put any energy into a diseased branch or anything like that. Any old wood here, so I'm going to clip that. I've mostly gone through and pruned most of this. You're going to clip. There is a great way to tell if wood is dead or diseased. What you'll do is just what's called the scratch test. You'll scratch the wood, and if it scratches and is brown, it's dead. So you can go ahead and remove that. If you scratch the wood and it's green, like that, can you see the green tint? Give it a minute to zoom in. Then you know the wood is good. So I would be able to go in and take this area off right at the branch, just like that. And then you're going to prune for shape. So if I want more of a circular oak leaf, I'm going to go in and kind of clip. Anywhere you clip, you're just going to want to clip above a node. So if you see a leaf, you can clip above that leaf. I love the natural shape of the hydrangea, so I just kind of leave mine. I think that is just the beauty of it, is the shape that it takes is so whimsical, and so it just adds so much charm to the garden. So it's meant to be grown in its natural form, but if you have to prune it for size, I'm obviously not going to cut my hydrangea, but I would just show you, you would just cut above a leaf node there. Also, you can prune for airflow if you feel like it's too crowded and you want more airflow. If you feel like it's getting diseased, you can prune out or thin out some of the branches that way. If you want more growth, what you'll do is just like you would on pruning your perennials. When you cut above that leaf node, it'll branch out. So if you want more branching, this would be the time to do it as well. And then this is the leftover flower stalk from last year. So definitely I can come in and take those off. All right, now we'll just look at overall care as far as the plant entirely. It is very low maintenance, but here's a few tips for you just to keep it looking good year round. When you water, you want to water deeply. I have drip going to all of my Oak Leaf hydrangeas, and that way they get watered deeply. I try to just water about once a week. If it is drought, super hot in the summer, sometimes I'll kick it up to about twice a week. In the spring, I do add an organic compost around the base of the plant. I also add several layers of mulch, and you want to make sure, especially in dry areas with soil temperatures that can get pretty hot in the summer, you definitely want to make sure you put on several layers of mulch around the base. Also just hold in that moisture over the roots. Along with the compost, I tend to add a rose tone, any type of slow release that is good for woody stems. They like slightly acidic soil, so if you need to add a soil acidifier just to help, you might get better results in the color of the leaves and the amount and quality of the flowers. So that's just something to keep in mind. Espoma does have a soil acidifier specifically for hydrangeas, so you could always make that an amendment around the base when you add your compost or your mulch. You can stir it in and then just spread that with your mulch. A lot of times that's an easy way to get it to and through the entire root system. Something to keep in mind about acidic soils is if your soils are too alkaline, you may get chlorosis, which is where the leaves would look really yellow instead of a deep green. This is a sign that your soil is not acidic enough. And at that point, you can add some acid to your soil and hopefully get the nutrients back to your leaves.
A lot of people add iron to fix chlorosis, but without adjusting the pH of your soil, it'll stay alkaline, and this affects the way your plant intakes iron and manganese. So instead of just adding iron, it's better to fix the underlying issue that could be causing the chlorosis.
Also, sunburn can happen in our hot Texas sun, and that is why it's really good to help protect from that afternoon shade if possible. And when you're fertilizing, make sure you're staying away from fertilizers with a high nitrogen count. That is why a rose fertilizer would be best, and so it'll encourage the flowering and not necessarily the heavy leafy growth. So if your oak leaf is not flowering, you might want to check into what fertilizer you're using. Also, just young oak leaves may not flower. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years for those flower heads to develop. So just be patient, fertilize correctly, water, watch the conditions, make sure that you're getting that morning sun, afternoon shade, and be patient with your flower buds. So they're generally pest free, but they can have some difficulties with rust, powdery mildew, leaf spot, and those type of things. And generally that's due to heavy rains and lack of airflow. So that's something that you'll want to consider. I don't treat mine typically if they get rust. I have other beautiful things going on in my garden that are a distraction from what's going on with my oak leaf. But if you feel like you need to treat it, you can use a copper fungicide. That's just usually so much work, and the oak leaf is going to go dormant during the winter anyway. So it's not typically something I concern myself with. And so I don't typically treat mine when something goes awry like that. This is where the good airflow would come in. So if you did want to prune it for good airflow, you might see less of these problems. It is a 4-season plant, and it's going to add gorgeousness to your yard for the entire year. In the spring, you're going to be developing these gorgeous blooms. In the fall, the leaves are going to turn a fiery red and a burgundy shade, adding all that color. And then in the winter, the bark starts to exfoliate, and so it adds a lot of texture to the garden. So in general, this is a year-round winner for anyone's garden. The pollen and nectar are all great food sources for all of your pollinators: moths, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, you name it. In the winter, you do want to make sure that you are not pruning. You don't want to traumatize that new cut and expose that to the cold temperatures. And if you have a new plant, you might consider adding extra mulch or just protecting the base of the plants and the roots for developing. Fall is a good time to plant an oak leaf, especially in hot areas. It gives those roots plenty of time to develop before the heat of the summer arrives. I tend to leave the flower stalks on. I rarely cut them off because I think that also adds texture to the plant, and just in general, I love to have some winter interest. And I also think it kind of gives beneficial insects a little place to hide. Another common problem with oak leaves is heavy branches and all of the leaves and branches drooping to the ground. There are several things that I will do to help this. Mainly, I use staking, where I will just prop it up, or I'll use twine, and I tend to tie branches. So I'll go ahead in and I'll wrap some twine way back here on the thick part of the stalk. You don't want to tie it up here by the flower because you'll break those stems, but you'll tie it way back on the thick part and pull it back to support whatever's behind it. So if you have a tree behind it, in my case, I have a fence and I will pull them up towards the fence. I do this because mine is right behind the pathway and I don't want the branches falling down onto the pathway. And I prefer to just keep them more upright. And that's why I pull mine back. But certainly if I had the space, I would let them fall. If you saw this oak leaf tree on my past garden tour, it was just starting to bloom and now the blooms are opening up. I had so many people ask me where I bought the oak leaf tree, and I didn't, and I've also never seen it in stores. So I thought I'd show you how you can make your own, because that's how I did it. It is time consuming. If you can buy one, that'd be great, because it'll save you several years. It does take years in the making. But this one is along the ground here. You can see with any hydrangea, this is not just the oak leaf, but also the big leaf. If you take a low-lying branch, such as this one, and you remove the leaves, okay, so take all of the leaves off as much as you can, and then you're going to bury that stem. Okay, so I'm going to dig a trench for the stem. This is also just how you propagate them as well. It doesn't have to be just for an oak leaf tree. If you wanted to make yourself an oak leaf, you're going to bury that oak leaf in the trench. I stake it down, and in the areas where the leaves were are the nodes, and those are where the roots are going to happen. Again, you're going to need to be patient, give it time for roots to develop. We can maybe check back next year. I've got too many tree roots here that I'm dealing with. All right, you're going to make sure to cover it. And then you're going to water it just like you would water anything else. And then after, probably this will be a year or two, you're going to cut this out and use those new roots to be the roots for your new oak leaf tree. Once you dug up your tree and planted it, then you start training it. And by training it, you will start pulling the leaves off of the trunk slowly and gradually as they grow. So you'll start at the bottom, just keep pulling the leaves off, and then you'll just travel to the top, just depending upon where you want the top of your hydrangea tree to be. And that is how you train an oak leaf into an oak leaf hydrangea tree. It is super important to stake it really well and really heavy. The top of this plant is super heavy, as you can imagine, with all of these flowers. I have it staked pretty well with a very thick stake. You don't want your plant breaking in half when the wind is blowing it. Mine is thankfully protected from the wind, but if I had it out in the open, I would definitely be concerned with it breaking. That's something you want to keep in mind. And if you did have it out in the open, and you might want to have it attached in several places along the base of the trunk. When planting an oak leaf, you want to amend your native soil. I use a compost and a landscaper's mix, and you want to make sure to provide good drainage, and I use expanded shell to help with that. I do also use Hollytone just to help get it established. It helps with the acidity levels in the soil. It also has biotone, which will help get the roots established. Also, when a plant is getting established, I'm more concerned about getting the roots established instead of it producing blooms. So I save the rose tone until the first year. And after you got it planted, you want to make sure you water deeply and make sure that you're keeping the roots moist until the plant is established. They also make beautiful additions to flower arrangements. I'm constantly cutting flowers in my garden, and spring, of course, is the easiest with all of the grown flowers, but they are gorgeous as part of your arrangements. So I have it in this container. I have some Orlea, Twilight Rose, and then some little stalk. Most of these were from seed, and lots of just beautiful snapdragons. And then some yarrow. And then this is Henry Dulberg salvia, kind of adding little pops of blue everywhere. But you can always find a branch towards the bottom where you won't miss that flower, because it is hard to cut it off, but they're usually not seen anyways. Those are the ones that I will use. I have a hard time cutting them off the actual bushes. Is that just me? Anybody else with that kind of problem? I know it can't just be me. All right, friends, well, that's it. So that should be everything you need to know about your oak leaves. So with a little love and care, this should be a winner in your garden every year from now on. So you should definitely go out there and get yourself an oak leaf. And if you get a different variety, I would love to know how it does in your yard. I'm always curious about ruby slippers. I've seen those at a few garden centers. So if that's one that you've tried, let me know how it's going for you. I've only tried Alice. I haven't tried any of the other varieties. There's another, I think, called Peewee. It's a little bit smaller. I'd love to know how that one is too. All right, and also, if you found the video helpful, don't forget, like, subscribe, comment, leave your comments. Let me know how your hydrangeas are doing. Any tips or suggestions that help you in your garden. I would love to hear all about them. All right, thanks, you guys. You have a great day. See you in the next one.